Thank you, Sandy. It's my great pleasure tonight to be able to introduce Professor Dennis Altman, Professor of Politics at La Trobe University, and he's Professor of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, which teaches American politics and culture, power politics in Australia, gender, sex and globalisation. Now, Dennis was elected to the Governing Council of the International AIDS Society in 2004 and served on a number of other national and international AIDS congresses, committees and societies, and served as President of the AIDS Society of Asia and the Pacific for 4 years until 2005. He's also a member of the Order of Australia for contribution to human rights and gay issues. And he was visiting chair of Australian Studies at Harvard University in 2005. In October 2006 he was elected to the board of Oxfam Australia. Now, Dennis has recently written an article in Overland which is called Escaping the Tribe. And I'd just like to read you a couple of quotes from his Overland essay. It says, "This article was born from what might be seen as a very Jewish need to understand and express the ambivalences I feel about Israel and Australia's position as one of its most steadfast allies. It is not possible to be a Jew and remain detached from feelings about Israel." The article was called Escaping the Tribe. I hope that as a result of coming here tonight to the AJDS annual dinner, Dennis realises that the tribe is not as narrow as he might have suspected it to be, and perhaps doesn't feel such a profound need to escape the tribe as he might have when he wrote this article. He said in the article, "I can think of no other subject of international politics so surrounded by fears and anxieties that it has become requisite for an author to proclaim his or her ethnic, religious and political allegiances before expressing an opinion. Jews in countries like Australia still behave as if they belong to a persecuted and vulnerable community which would be weakened by any internal dissent. There is little understanding of the community's relative strength, especially as viewed by the smaller and far less resourced Palestinian population. I can confirm that as a member of a dialogue group in which a number of Melbourne Jews are participating, run by the La Trobe University Dialogue Centre, that the Melbourne Jewish community is far better organised, far more diverse, far more articulate than the very small Palestinian community in Melbourne. Some of you may have read Dennis's article in yesterday's Age, in the opinion and debate page, which says skeptics find comfort in the cost of change. Unlike the Australian Jewish News, which just referred to Tony Abbott's election to the leader of the opposition, in terms of whether Tony was or wasn't a good friend of Israel, and nothing else, Dennis has written, "Meanwhile, Tony Abbott is on record with a range of positions on climate change, which taken together suggests he believes it is real, it is due to human behaviour, but nothing should be done to change this behaviour that will cost anything. This, as George Bush Sr. might have said, is voodoo environmentalism." So, it's now my great pleasure to introduce Dennis to you, and I'm sure you'll get a very interesting speech from him. Thank you, Dennis.
I think I should say, first of all, in self-defence, that I didn't pick the title Escaping the Tribe, just as I didn't pick whatever title it was the sub-editors gave to my piece in The Age. For those of you who write will realise that titles are one of the things that editors like to keep to themselves, and you only discover once an article appears. It's, in a sense, I don't feel I'm escaping the tribe. I sort of feel a strange sense of coming back to people I've known for a very long time. And some of the conversations we've been having over at that table, where there's been a debate about the origins of the Australian Jewish Democratic Society, it's clear it goes back to debates in Australia, to the work of people like Norman and Bernie in the 1970s. Some of you in this room, like me, will have been involved in the debates that took place and that actually split very bitterly the Australian Union of Students in, I think, 1975. And I did actually promise one war story. Shortly after that, and it was, I think, the first time that I'd ever been seriously involved in a debate, a public debate in which being Jewish was relevant. And I had discovered, to my dismay, that some people on the Australian left were in fact anti-Semitic. And I say this as someone who, unlike many of the contributors to the Jewish News, does not believe that all criticism is anti-Semitic. I'm actually referring to a man who was then, and someone who will remember, Secretary of the Labor Party in Victoria, Bill Hartley, who told me very proudly that he was anti-Semitic. He was also very stupid, of course, because he didn't realise...
He was a liberal.
He didn't realise he was telling a Jew that he was anti-Semitic. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I cannot remember the exact sequence of events, because I wasn't planning to tell this story. I would have checked it. But I did, in fact, repeat the claim that Hartley was anti-Semitic on ABC radio, following which I was served with an injunction. And there was this moment of fear. I mean, I'd never had somebody come to the door and, serve me an injunction. And there was going to be a court case. And I rang up Mark Taft, whose father is in this room, and whom I knew because we hung out together in that hotbed of left-wing radicalism, the Socialist Forum. And Mark made a few phone calls, and soon it turned out that both the Jewish and the Labour establishment were going to back me to the hills, that I was going to have access to every QC in the country I needed. And somehow Bill Hartley's case never went forward. But that, to me, as I say, is sitting here with some of you, has brought back some very interesting memories. And I want to come back, as I say, to the questions that raises, in particular, to that very interesting insight that came about when Hartley told me, quite unabashed and unapologetically, that he was anti-Semitic. And didn't, I think, realise, had no sense at all who he was saying it to. Now, when I picked this title, and I think somewhere along the line a preposition got left out, the title was Coming Out as Jewish. And of course it was a play on words, it was a play on the sense that we use the term coming out very much now in common language to talk about sexuality. And I thought it would be interesting to think about the similarities and the differences and the insights into identity politics. And one of the obvious similarities comes directly out of that story around Hartley. Namely the fact that Jews and homosexuals often have to choose whether or not to disclose our identity. That is, we do not, except in exceptional circumstances, wear those identities in ways that other people necessarily can recognise. And I've had the experience, particularly in the United States, where because of my Australian accent, you don't think I've got an Australian accent, to American ears of course I do, because of my Australian accent nobody imagines I could possibly be Jewish, because all Jews after all should sound as if they come from Brooklyn. And I have had the experience of hearing quite extraordinary anti-Semitic comments and cracks, made because I hadn't gone through the somewhat, it seems, embarrassing and often irrelevant disclosure. I mean, you don't, after all, sit down with a group of strangers and start off by saying, "Hi, I'm Dennis Altman, I'm gay and Jewish." Now, there are people who do this, and they're usually comedians on the American circuit. But thinking about this led me to think about a whole lot of ways in which we frame our identities, in which we choose the situations in which those identities become important to us, and we choose